That was intense.
All right. I don't know how you pulled this off. I mean, like, okay, you've won. This is amazing. You've won the Super 7. You've won the DBNI. Tell lesser beings like myself, how does it feel?
It feels great. I am mentally, physically, emotionally exhausted. I don't know if that was the highest level strategy game I've ever played, but it was the most intense negotiating I've ever done, period. And I'm not even sure another game comes close in terms of the combination of length and the quality and difficulty of those negotiations. Everyone, particularly those who were there in like the 5 of us that were around for most of that game, was just so good at negotiating. It was so hard to find a breakthrough and to sort of keep people on side, get people doing what I needed to do. And I think I did it very well, but God, did it take a lot.
It was amazing. I'm going to go back to our pregame interview where we talked about being patient. We talked about all that. We talked about the grind. Talked about not overreacting or underreacting. We come out of the get-go here, and I think the first sort of thing is this bounce in Tyrolia, which causes you to immediately allow Doug to get 3 builds when he asked you to bounce Holland. You agree. What's the thought process here? Why are you giving him 3 builds? Why are you bouncing Jordan? Put me in your head.
I was concerned almost immediately that it was feeling very airy in the East. I felt like Katie would want to work with Riaz most out of people there. I felt like Bradley would want to air, and I felt like an air is good for Riaz. You know my position on Austria and airs, so I was concerned that there would be an air. And you also know my position on Western triples. I hate Western triples. So there's 2 responses to an air. There's the Western triple, or there's kill the third person in the West really, really quickly. And that was the sort of calculated gamble I was making. I was hoping that I get Katie on board and that we could just kill Germany before it really, like, before Doug would stab me, before anything too bad would happen. And it was a gamble, and to be honest, it wasn't a gamble that worked, but that was my thought process at the time.
I actually, just so you know, think that this bounce is very significant because Jordan and you each made, as unexpectedly, the same pitch. Jordan's saying you're the best player in the world. You're saying Jordan's the best player in the world. We got to take each other out. You kind of demurred about Belgium in the spring negotiations, and Jordan was like, "Take Belgium, get your 3 builds." Like, and if that was a real possibility, and this helps you tremendously. And it looks like you have, pretty good EF, and you're also got some issues with Katie building north, but you're fine with that.
I wasn't thrilled, but I was okay with it.
So we get here, we start the takedown. I think Doug preferred a convoy into Holland, but fine. And now Katie's sort of, balancing a bit. But the Doug move on you so early, fall 1902. Jordan lobbied hard for it, promised the world, as you might expect in these situations. Had to give you a sinking pit in your stomach to see Jordan in Denmark with Katie's support, Doug attacking you. But how do you respond?
So I expected Doug to be coming. Like, I kind of read it on the wall. For most of that turn, Katie and I had been talking a lot. Katie had agreed to support me to Denmark. And it was very late on. Jordan got her to flipped, and she supported him in instead. And this is also why I went in with the fleet rather than with the army into Holland, knowing that it was quite possible I wouldn't keep it. and I wanted the army back for defensive purposes. Whereas I think if I convoyed that army in, I think that my position's actually far weaker. So yeah, it was a difficult position. I was not thrilled with Katie, and it's fair play to Jordan. It's why Jordan's so good at this game, for getting her to do that. But yeah, it was definitely difficult, and I could have just turtled and played defense, but I built the fleet Edinburgh so that I'd have options going forward still, and not giving up on the game.
You did not give up, but things get rough. Losing the North Sea in 1903 isn't the best situation here. France is looking really strong, but your bacon got saved by Bradley here. I think this is a key help for you as the game moves on, because without this, and it really happened by luck, Doug and Bradley had a tense negotiation there that induced Bradley to make this move. But here you go. And you somehow get Doug to, Doug was going to go back. Doug did not want to fight you at this point. And really, that was a big help to you.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Bradley pretty early, and he was like already 80% coming west, just because Doug was getting so big. And like everyone knows the DBNI meta of France taking all the English dots, then they take the German dots, then they win. And I think Doug, by going after me so early, had made himself sort of very, very big. And I was pretty confident with Bradley in Italy that there would be a response. Like maybe there are some players I don't know as well, or I'm less sure will make a response. But Bradley plays the board, and he wasn't just going to let Doug roll through me and take everything. So I was obviously pretty happy about that. And then I take North Sea back. I tap Belgium to get Jordan back into the game. I'm hoping at that point maybe me and Jordan can work together against Doug. It didn't really work out that way, but that was the sort of the goal in mind. Is now that Bradley's come west, let's sort of EGI it a bit late.
Well, I'm going to give kudos to you, because you, with Jordan's support, take Sweden here. And you managed to keep her on side for another 11 years even after this.
Yeah, I mean, this was obviously not a great. Katie was very, very mad about this. This was like the air is sticking together. We're kind of having to Western triple. Like I wasn't thrilled with this turn, but I had to walk into St. Petersburg, and I could have done that, and then I offered to go to Sweden instead to help Jordan. And then I think this turn it's really crucial, because Jordan refused to support hold me in Sweden here. And after having gone out on a limb to help him in spring, it really broke our relationship in a way that basically from this point on, unless Doug had sent everything north, I was 100% anti-Jordan, because I'd gone out on a limb for him and he'd sort of screwed me immediately. And I think Katie knows that I'm that kind of player. I can be vengeful, and she recognized that I was very vengeful towards Jordan for that. And that was, I think, a key part of getting us back on side.
He was really trying to work with Katie here. He was that was the game plan, but Katie did not commit to it. And she was obviously at this point worried about her retreat into St. Petersburg. If the attack pressed on. So this was key, and you became anti-Jordan, and you were verbally anti-Jordan. And you get Doug to Ruhr. You let him into English Channel. It's not really let so much as he basically, kind of insisted on being in English Channel, and you're like, fine, but you got to go to Ruhr. I think that was ends up being a great move, but so many English players would be scared to let him do that. The follow-up to Mid-Atlantic, though, is problematic.
Yeah, I mean, again, I had to sort of begrudgingly agree to that follow-up to Mid-Atlantic. The fact Katie had built the North Coast fleet really tied my hands. My position was really poor, and so I had to make concessions. And if I'm making concessions, I have to decide, right, what do I get in return? And the move to Ruhr and the move on Holland was something I could really offer Doug. And I think I was kind of thinking that Doug, having having attacked me once and been attacked by the rest of the board for it, I was relatively confident he wouldn't just try and do the exact same thing again and get Riaz coming straight, not Riaz, Bradley coming straight back at him again. In a way that maybe if Bradley hadn't already come west once because Doug was looking scary, maybe I'm not that confident that Doug will be factoring that into his sort of thinking. But yeah, I was. That's why I was so willing to take the risks at that stage for sure.
Now it's everything against Doug. And you got Katie to work against. I'm sorry, everything is Jordan, and you've got Katie to work with you on this. You build in Liverpool because you had no other choice but to build there. And it's sort of the takedown of Jordan occurs for a while. Stop me if there's anything you want to mention. But I think we get at this point to your first big decision point. Your first big decision point, I mean, other than scrambling to win, to scrambling to survive, is do I attack Doug or do I attack Katie? And if we had noticed that fleet movement from Liverpool to Clyde to Norwegian, God, I thought you were going to attack Katie. I thought
So
this
did
was I thought this was going to be the entire setup. But as we go to 1907, no, sir, that does not happen. What's going on?
I thought I was going to attack Katie next. Like I was just as surprised as you were that I ended up going the other way. Relations broke down between me and Doug that turn. Doug wanted me to attack Katie, which obviously that's reasonable, but he wouldn't leave English Channel, and it just he has then started pitching like he comes to North and goes through, and it was all very. It sounded like a pitch for me to be his Janissary, and yes, he was ahead of me, but he wasn't that far ahead of me, and it really. Given that I was taking, like, if I attack Katie, I probably lose Sweden, so I'm going down to go up. And if he's not willing to like make any compromises while I do that, I just had no faith in him sort of sitting there. Like you see where his units go. If I do go against Katie that turn, he's probably going to get Kiel out of it. He's in position to convoy to Wales when he wants it, which means that I can't really use aggressive convoys against Katie. It's just a really, really difficult position for me. And yeah, that was like we had a long talk. I wasn't happy at the end of it. I swung into what I think is a pretty ineffective stab on Doug, but it was sort of, well, if I'm not attacking Katie, this is what I got to do.
I don't think I have a lot of respect for Doug making 2 Super 7s in a row, but I can see why he wins. He's a very aggressive negotiator. I said on the stream that Doug is always a hammer and every other person he talks to is a nail. And you knew that it would be hard to repair things with Doug after this. I dealt with him. I was in England last year. Your friend, he is a difficult person to deal with, but it focused you in a way and gave a lot of confidence to Katie, I think, that I'm focusing on Doug. I'm focusing on Doug. And Katie did not feel threatened, and she didn't want a 2-front war.
And again, this is play to players, not the game. I know from past games of Katie's how much she hates being like miles ahead and everybody coalescing against her. Like she hates being the one person by themselves in a room while everyone else is talking together, which is why I was willing to make like wrist Sweden, Denmark, heel, all of that was open. There was 3-dot stab on me for a
long time.
Years. Yeah. And other players, I think, do take that. And it's the fact that I know how much Katie hates being in that position where if it had won her the game, I think she would have done it if she was sure it would win her the game. But I think she was very, very afraid that it would turn into everyone against Katie. And I know how much she just really despises being in that position. And so that's it. It's play the players, not the game. And you have to use your knowledge of the players. And like I've already talked about how I made moves knowing Bradley. Now it was my time to make moves knowing Katie.
There's another thing too, which I don't want you, which I really appreciate, which is You made a bet that Katie would not betray your trust, but Riaz made the same bet, and he was being very calm with Katie, each of you thinking that they were incentivized to attack the other. But one thing that I think you did that Riaz did not do, each season you were giving Katie concrete ideas and plans about how she could move forward and grow, and that the two of you could work together. And being useful in that way, even when you're not dealing with the Balkans, really helped. I don't know if you talked her into this stab of Riaz or not.
I did. This was one of the hardest negotiations. Like the bar to get Katie to stab her ally is so high. It is really, really high. But like you, I knew that Riaz wasn't going to make a stupid stab on her. And I found out they were doing the sort of Rum Munich swap. And that meant that if Rum was being given willingly, then Riaz was never going to have a good stab on Katie anymore. Like, as long as Rum's there, it's hanging. Austria has a stab. If Rum is willingly given up in exchange for something else, Austria's stab is so much worse, which means that I could no longer rely on Riaz stabbing Katie, which meant that I had to sort of go all out to try and get Katie to stab Riaz. And Bradley at that stage was fairly defeatist as well. And I really wanted to give Bradley a path back into the game, and that was a big part of the negotiation as well. It was just as much work put in on Katie, and you can see, like, you look at those moves in the north, like the self-bouncing keel, the tap on Ruhr, that took probably 10 straight minutes of hard negotiating to get that to happen, and it gave me what I needed in the north. It gave Katie the confidence that I wasn't going to stab her because I was moving everything the other direction. I was leaving myself open in a way that Riaz wasn't. Like, Riaz isn't going to do that, maybe in the way that I am. And she was bought by Bradley, and Bradley wanting a way back into the game, and I could pitch that. And so I was just pitching, like, me, Katie, Bradley. We work together. Me and Bradley against Doug, Bradley and Katie against Riaz. And in the end, I found that high bar to get Katie to stab, but that was really, really hard work for sure.
And not to lose a center in the process when she just had so much dominance at that point over you. And it continued for several years now. Now you can open up things against Doug, and things are going better. Doug gets a rebuild from losing Tunis. You agreed to Katie being in Norway. I was like, wow, you are dancing here trying to, but like, people would ask you for things and you would agree. But you were focused now on Doug, at least in the conversations. I think you always had an eye on Katie, but we're focused on Doug.
At this point of the game, my dots to win this game have to be French. Sure, I can stab Katie, but it's not enough to win unless I'm taking at least Belgium. Belgium minimum, probably Brest, Paris, depending how the East is shaking up. And I willingly let Katie into Norway, which I'll point out is her own center, because all that time, I was supposed to have given her Sweden back. And if I'm conceding on giving her Norway, I'm not conceding on giving her Sweden. It's sort of a redirect.
And she brought it up repeatedly. She wanted Sweden. You knew that was coming. Mm-hmm. But you kept arguing to her to let you get in position against Doug to do it. I honestly don't think you told Katie a lie all the way going to 1914 or 15, whenever you finally made the move on her. After, for about 10 game years.
There was between when I stabbed her early on, when I took Sweden, when I was working with Jordan, and when I stabbed her at the end, I agree. There's one or two times where she's like, "Are you feeding the moves to Bradley?" And I wasn't feeding any moves, but I was. There were a couple of times I gave vague hints of what she was likely to do, or maybe you should protect against this. But I never once specifically told her moves to someone. But I was always just trying to work it so that she wasn't rolling the East. Obviously, it's control the board. If I'm working with Katie, I need there to be opposition to Katie elsewhere, and for most of that time, I was really pressing Riaz and Bradley to work together. Pretty hard until I think the fall of this year, or no, it'd be next year, or when Bradley stabbed me, and then Bradley had sort of stabbed me and Katie at the same time, and I guess that's going to be your next talking point.
Well, yeah, but okay. First, there's a lot to cover because I think this ends up being a big season. One, God, I couldn't believe you let her into Sweden, but you did. You told her you were going to do that. You helped Bradley into Marseille, but I think a huge issue is she knew at this point Bradley was going for Munich. She asked Ruhr to support Munich. She was, she was kind of hoping Riaz wouldn't cut Silesia, but she wasn't sure. And you're like, no, I gotta ensure that Bradley gets Marseille, so it's going to tap Burgundy. And she's like, well, you should tap it with Belgium then, and you can still support me. And you were quiet for like 10 or 15 seconds there, but then we're like, no, I've got to take Burgundy to kill Doug. And she agreed to it. But I think that was a pivotal negotiation where you were able, she's gaining Sweden, but she's losing, Munich, losing Caen, gaining Smyrna. So she's flat, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and my pitch to her at that point was like, I'm giving up Sweden. I'm going to be disbanding. Therefore, I need to be in position to take stuff from France next year, which I think was important. Like, I'd put off the giving up of Sweden for, I don't know, 5-6 years. It was a long time that I'd managed to kick that can down the road. I knew that I couldn't really kick it any longer. And so now it's like, okay, how do I give it up in a way that's least damaging? And she said, like at the start of the turn, she's like, oh, I'm going to move Baltic there. And I'm like, nope, you're going to move Norway there. Norway can go to Sweden. That's fine. You can cover Berlin, beach that fleet. That's fine. But I was pretty determined for her to take it with that fleet.
She so didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think people understand. She did not want to do that. All right.
No, again, that's a tough negotiation.
Yeah, but you give her the favorable disband here.
And a little bit. I kind of knew I'd be moving straight back there, so it's how favorable is it? It looks favorable. It's aesthetics.
Exactly, which is beautiful. The other thing that is that you're enabling Bradley here because you realize Doug is just basically defending against you, and that unless French dots went down, you had no real chance of progress. So you have this budding friendship with Bradley against Doug, which I think is super helpful.
Yeah, and like when Bradley was down, I sort of helped get him back into the game. And I know if Bradley's got a shot at winning, Bradley will go for that shot at winning. That's the sort of player he is. He stabbed me for Spain at the same time he'd stabbed Katie in the East. I think that was unwise. I think he sort of pushed us to keep working together at the point where I was all on board to just carve up the French dots with Bradley and then go into Katie. But Bradley stabbed me, and then he stabbed Katie as well, which just gave both of us reason to keep working together because Katie was very, very concerned by AI, and I no longer had someone reliable to help knock out France with. So I started trying to disengage with France instead. But yeah, I think Bradley needed to pick one of us to attack, but by attacking both of us, Bradley sort of turned 1912 into a coalition against Bradley here.
Yeah, before that, before Bradley jumps up like this, there had been, I would call it a Cold War, with you and Katie kind of being on the same side, Bradley and Riaz being on the same side, and then you both spend the second half of the turn trying to convince the other, to do something, but things were sticking together. But here, the coalition against Bradley begins. You get Doug to move to Mid-Atlantic. I wasn't sure he was going to do this, but it turns out Doug was motivated by getting dots back. And I don't think he thought he was going to get any dots off of you. You know for a fact, you said this was a trust but verify move going into the channel, but you knew Doug would not want that move.
I did, but I felt like my other units would be enough that he would be okay with it. I wasn't. See, there's also the thing is that he told me he was holding Brest, which meant that I actually thought it would be less of a problem than it was because he'd walked out of Brest having not done what he said he was going to do. That was another really difficult negotiation. As you say, Doug is kind of like a hammer. Getting Doug to concede or compromise on anything was really difficult throughout. It was always sort of, there was a lot of my way or the highway, and on this turn, this took us probably half of the turn, which at this stage of the game, I didn't really want to be spending half of my turn talking to Doug, but that's what it took, and I made it happen. I had to sort of accede to these Katie moves in the east as well, where she's pulling back, and that gets the sort of big coalition against Bradley, which, if Bradley hadn't stabbed me for Spain, I'm never happy about Katie doing this. But because Bradley had just stabbed me, I was all on board with, okay, you can pull back. You can pull back to there. Let Riaz attack Bradley again. And that was another really difficult turn to manage and get sort of on somewhat of the same page as Doug.
Put newer players now in the position of you that you're not Peter McNamara level calculator, but at this point in 1913, you're starting to talk about numbers it takes to win. And your thought process is Riaz is really looking at 9, or, win a tie break. And I think basically you didn't say it, but you hinted that you thought you were going to have to get to 11. You're thinking about dots in the situation. Put us in your mindset of what you want to accomplish now. You end up accomplishing everything you wanted to do and more, but where are we going?
At this point, my sort of diplomatic position was that Bradley had got a bit too big for his boots, and Bradley needed knocking down a peg again. Because Bradley was, if there's not a fight against Bradley, I think Bradley has a fairly serene path to some more centers, because I knew Doug was more annoyed at me than he was at Bradley. Not so annoyed that he wouldn't go and take his centers back, but he was more annoyed at my stab than he was at Bradley coming in afterwards. So I had to, that's why I made so many concessions to pull so far away from Doug as well. I got Katie to support me to Munich, but that was actually fairly easy because Katie was annoyed about Bradley having sided with Riaz and screwing her. The really hard thing here was getting Riaz not to support Munich, because like you see there, Bohemia holds. If Bohemia just support holds Munich, my sort of whole plan really is very, very shaky, especially as France and Italy force Burgundy, and Munich was really, really critical that turn. I was relatively confident that Riaz would take Trieste, but I was not that confident that Riaz would also let me take Munich. That took some work and was a bit of fly by the seat of the pants, but I as you say, I thought Riaz was looking at sort of the Balkan dots and hoping to win on a tiebreak, because Riaz had tiebreak advantage over all of us. He's Austria, of course he does. I had tiebreak advantage over both Italy and Russia, which is not always the case with England. But that doesn't mean that I can allow Riaz to get that big. And given that Katie had pulled back, I needed Riaz and Bradley fighting. And then if Riaz and Bradley are fighting, I think I can get Katie to go back in. But I don't think Katie goes back in unless there's a real fight between them. I think she plays defense.
You get the fight. Bradley announces he's anti-Riaz. I mean, he's not even really talking. I mean, it changes, but at the time, it seemed he was definitely anti-Riaz. He was selling it to everybody, and I think everybody was believing it. Now, you can do these little things in an interview like this. You move to Mid-Atlantic. Doug's continually pressing you to move, away. You only convoy to Belgium. I thought a convoy to Holland might be what you had in mind, but no, you had your eyes on those French dots. Am I correct?
100%. I had I felt I could take a couple of dots off of Katie, but I didn't know if that would be enough to win. In fact, I was pretty sure it wouldn't be enough to win. I really didn't see the Balkans staying as balanced as they'd been till the end of the game. Like when time pressure's on and people start taking dots, I think I needed to be taking dots on the other side. So this is the point where if I want to go after Katie, I can go to Helderland with that fleet, but I kind of knew that Doug's going to be the next target, and it's a case of like when rather than if. And one of my mistakes, we talked about this in my interview before the game, like that sort of mid-game to end-game transition not being ruthless enough. I pinpointed that as my weakness when you asked me in that interview. And so I was pretty determined this time I'm going to be ruthless. This time, every unit is going against Doug, and that's what sort of worked out and got me Brest and Paris as quickly as it did.
Unbelievable. Just fantastic, even with a rebuild from Doug. Or maybe it's not
It's
a rebuild,
build. Yeah.
fine. Yeah. But you have it here. But I think the key thing was getting a build in Sev. I mean, because that posed no threat to you whatsoever. The two of you are still working together here. But it does wobble a bit. It wobbles. And I'm only doing this to show the genius of you. You take Brest, you take Paris, you retreat to Western Med, which I think was fun and interesting and probably the right thing to do. But Katie moved to Silesia, and I'm like, oh, she sees it. She's not going to let him just take Berlin. And because you were obviously had that setup that was there. Katie could see it. I'm like, oh, well, she's done it. But then I don't know what you did. I don't know what you were doing. But how do you get her to go to Bohemia while you go to Tyrolia? This is amazing.
So I think Katie going to Silesia was very reasonable, but Katie didn't tell me. And I was able to play on that fact that she'd moved there without telling me to sort of to play the guilt card. Like I pretended to see it as a very hostile move. And it could be hostile. Like she could do Berlin to Baltic, Silesia to Berlin, and start shuffling up against me. I didn't think that was what she was planning to do for 1 second, but I had that as an excuse. It's a start of a negotiation point where I can then focus on that. And then I'm like, all right, okay, that's fine. That's fine. I forgive you. And so I'm coming across as the forgiving person. And then I offered to go to Tyrolia. Like a year or two earlier, I'd said there's no chance of me ever going to Tyrolia really strongly to her I think it was actually a DM. Like the amount of DMing going on this game, especially me and Katie and me and Bradley, and I imagine Katie and Bradley as well, was almost as much as the talking. It was just constant talking to everyone in that regard. But yeah, once I said, okay, I'll go to Tyrolia. I'll help you. You can go down to Bohemia. We can work in the Balkans, and I managed to sell it that way, and she went along with it. Yeah,
I think there's another huge thing that happened, but you tell me if it's not huge at all. Bradley is happy. He's he had just gone up 3 in spring 1914. I don't even think Katie realized it right away. It seemed like, I don't think you knew exactly what Katie was doing. She didn't know exactly what you were doing. But anyways, Bradley's up 3, okay, because both of you are helping him. And you're still trying to work with Bradley from the sound of it, sort of. But Bradley just tells you, unsolicited and for no reason, Riaz is just helping me into his dots. And that seemed to get a tone change from you a little bit. And I think you already said you were aware Bradley's the kind of player is going to go for it if he has it. But I think you started to really think this was a real possibility at that point.
for sure. Like I knew, or maybe not knew, but I was relatively sure that if Bradley wasn't in contention, that he would favor me. Maybe I don't think he would necessarily throw to me, but I think he wouldn't care if I was the one winning, like out of me and Katie. Whereas if Bradley is in with a chance, Bradley will go for that chance. That's the sort of player he is. Full respect to him. I can't criticize it at all. He
God
saw
love
his
him.
chance, he went for it. Yeah, that as you should. Great play. But for sure, there's sort of two facets to that. There's A, okay, I need to react, but also B, that means I can try and make Bradley into the bad guy to Katie. And it gives me a sort of negotiating point where, all right, we need to be worried about Bradley. And you focus on Bradley. You focus on Bradley. Don't mind what I'm doing. Focus on Bradley. And that's sort of what I was going for at this stage. Like Tyrolia was never really intended to take anything. It was like a big distraction, if anything. I didn't want it blown up the way it actually turned out to be. That was not ideal, but it wasn't intended to capture so much as to disrupt, distract, make sure that Bradley is having a tougher time and that Katie thinks Bradley's the big bad enemy.
And couple that with the move to Terenian, which was a 50-50, but I think Terenian was probably going to go through. Bradley has to cover Tunis, I think there. And so now even though Bradley's building, you've got your units there, and it looks to everybody, I should say except me. I thought you were going to attack Katie. It looked to everybody, I thought you would do it a different way though, that you were going to put pressure on Bradley and maybe help Katie here. And who knows, you're still dealing with Doug and Bradley in the West. We get to 1915 and you make your move.
Yep. And yeah, I'd managed to square away that Belgium to Holland fleet move as, oh, well, I was upset by Silesia. I needed this in case you went to Baltic and Berlin with the two units when it was up there. And it was really helpful for having an excuse to do that because it let me do this to go after Berlin. Always the plan would be, let's keep bouncing in Norway until a spring term where I go to Norwegian North and just take Norway, and she's in Norway. She can't threaten Denmark, whereas if she's in Sweden, I have to do more covering. But yeah, it was.
Now, did you go to Riaz with this brace of Vienna? Was that Riaz coming to you, or are you going to Riaz? Because that is so critical.
This wasn't intentional. This was Riaz offered it to me at the start of the turn, and I'm like, okay, but if you want, I was pro. Any center Riaz had was good for me. The more centers Riaz had was a center that neither Katie nor Bradley had. So I was, whatever that unit can do, it's actually just there to help Riaz survive and on as many centers as he possibly can. It was like a year later than he'd asked for my help, but it was finally I'd make the move that he wanted me to make on Katie, and I'd come to Tyrolia help him survive. I'm not sure the brace was actually a good thing, but it was because the blow up I think is actually really bad. It makes Munich really vulnerable, but
it is bad actually.
Yeah, it was. Again, I probably shouldn't have moved there once sort of I knew what Bradley was doing with his units. I think that maybe I should have actually just let Katie get in, go and then been able to retreat to Bohemia, but maybe not. Maybe it's really hard balancing which of Katie or Bradley's the bigger threat at this stage. There's only 1 year left, and Riaz is imploding.
I don't think you knew how close it was to a throw from Katie to Bradley after.
Oh, I knew.
Well, I will tell you this. The way you're talking to Bradley is second place is a good result. You've done a tremendous job in this game. I'm very happy for you. And I think it was obvious that Bradley was kind of play acting because his tone totally changed for the first time in 11 hours. But on the other hand, Katie is literally offering Bradley the win. Mm-hmm. She's offering it to him at that point.
I know.
But they have this mix-up over Aegean. Bradley thought Aegean was going to bowl with Khan's support. Katie builds in St. Petersburg. Her dots are a little more vulnerable to Bradley, and it doesn't work out that way. And we go into 1916. You don't know this, but Bradley, you suspected, I'm sure, Bradley affirmatively trying to get Katie to throw, but she won't do it. And you know what she says, McAuliffe? She goes, I'm mad at McAllis for recent events, but I'm kind of mad at you for the whole game.
And I'll put it this way, Ed. All the time she was talking to Bradley in that voice call, I was messaging her constantly, and I was reminding her of everything Bradley had done through the game. Like when she'd attacked Riaz in the first place, and he then switched and flipped on her, and he'd done that multiple times. And I knew what she was offering to Bradley. I didn't know if she'd go through with it or not, but it's just constant reinforcement, constant reinforcement. I think Bradley made a big mistake in the West killing Darg in 1915. I think that was actually a really critical error. If he just gives Darg Spain or keeps like Portugal for Darg, I'm really short on armies with that Tyrolia Piff. But because I get into mid-Atlantic Ocean, I can then just do the convoy to Gascony, which is a game-winning move.
I mean, it was there as soon as you built Army Liverpool, and you know that was it. Look, straight talk time. You know your game has improved. I remember the old McAllis when I used to beat the old McAllis. Now I can't beat the old McAllis. You struggled on top boards, a lot of top boards, and now you've won Dixie. You've won top boards. You won BDL, I believe. Was it BDL or BDC? Some BD.
BDL, yeah.
BDL. Now this. What do players need to do to win top boards? I'm speaking for myself here. What do I need to do, but what do players need to do when they get to top boards? How have you done this great improvement recently? And help us.
I think a lot of it is mental. I think that I used to put so much pressure on myself. I would every single top board I get to, there'd be so much pressure. And when I lost, I don't think the pressure helped me play better. And then when I lost, I'd be thinking about it for weeks, months, so long that I'd just be thinking about that game and what I could have done differently, what went wrong, how did it all slip away again. And I'm also like, there's the risk of making it a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in your own mind if you're doing that as well. Like, if I think that things are going to go wrong, I'm less confident in game, and therefore it's more likely to go wrong. And once I won, to some degree, Dixie, but also the VDL top board last year, I got the monkey off my back. And now, like this year, I lost VDL on a tiebreak. All right, fair enough. I played really well. So did Jordan, and okay, he deserved the win. It just doesn't bother me as much as it used to. If I hadn't won VDL a year ago, I think I'd have still been cursing over that VDL top board and losing it on a 50-50 in the final turn. And I just wasn't. I'm just not. I've sort of shed the baggage, and so I come to games more positive. I think more positively. I play more positively. I talk more positively. I can convince people to do things better because I'm more confident, and confidence is key.
I'm hearing you got to visualize yourself winning. That's what I'm hearing, because I don't visualize myself winning. But look, McAllis, my God, I don't want to be on a board with you again. Okay, like I want to retire for diplomacy to see what you've been doing, but I'm so proud of you. You have nothing left to prove. You've proven it all. And I, for one, will gladly accept your retirement. Congratulations again, my friend.
Thank you, Ed. This means a lot. Like, I say it like it doesn't bother me if I don't win, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter to me when I do. I go into these games. I said in our interview, I think I'm playing better than I ever have been, but you're here for the recognition as well. Like, if I play better than I ever have been and then keep losing, maybe that's maybe I'm not playing better than I ever have been. So
maybe you're Ed Sullivan. Look, you're the diplomat of the year. They can never take that away from you, except in 2026, unless you let them. But for 1 year, you're the diplomat of the year. I think this is the toughest tournament out there. I really do. The truest test of diplomacy for the longest amount of time with the best possible players. Congratulations again. Brandon's going to kill me for a 45-minute interview. Good night.
Thank you. Cheers, Ed.